Hi and welcome. I'm Gavin Lon. So we have now completed all the functionality that enables a user to add items to the user's shopping cart, as well as remove items from the user's shopping cart. A user is also able to update the quantity of products within the user's shopping cart. So, of course, no point leaving the products hanging around in the user's shopping cart. The next logical step is for a user to purchase the products in the user's shopping cart. So, we are going to create a Razor component in this part of the course that denotes a checkout facility, whereby the user can purchase the products within the user's shopping cart. So, how do we create a payment facility so that users can purchase the items in the user's shopping cart? The answer is we must integrate a payment gateway into our application. So, if we navigate to this website, we can see here some useful information regarding payment gateways. What is a payment gateway? A payment gateway is a service that authorizes and processes debit/credit card or PayPal payments for online merchants and traditional brick-and-mortar businesses. A payment gateway facilitates these transactions by encrypting sensitive data and transferring it between a payment portal, a website or a mobile device, and the bank/front-end processor. If we scroll further down this page, we can see a list of the most popular payment gateway providers. You've probably heard of a few of them, like for example PayPal and Stripe. PayPal, Stripe, Square, SecurePay, WorldPay, Authorize.net, ToCheckout.com, Braintree. I have a business account with PayPal, so I'm most familiar with PayPal. In this video, I'll give you a very basic guide on how you can integrate the PayPal payment gateway into your application. Even though I'm specifically using PayPal, the same fundamental principles will apply for other payment gateways. Please see the relevant instructions provided by your preferred payment gateway service provider on how you can integrate your preferred payment gateway into your applications. The payment gateway service provider will provide developers with information on how to integrate the relevant payment gateway into your application. It's not as difficult as you might think. All of the heavy lifting, as it were, is done through the third-party payment gateway. So, this tutorial is not a definitive or comprehensive guide on how to integrate a payment gateway into your application, but it will hopefully give you a very good idea of how to integrate a payment gateway into your applications. It all depends on your application's requirement on how you go about implementing relevant payment gateway integration functionality in your applications. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing. And please ring the bell so as to be notified of future content. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and please feel free to share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage. Any support is greatly appreciated. Let me first present a brief disclaimer before we start this tutorial. This is not a definitive guide on integrating a payment gateway into your application. This is certainly not a final e-commerce solution. The purpose of this tutorial serves to give you a basic idea of how you are able to integrate a payment gateway into a Blazor WebAssembly application. If you wish to create an application that uses a payment gateway in a live environment, you'll need to research relevant information provided by your preferred payment gateway provider in order to gain a thorough understanding of how to create an e-commerce solution using the relevant payment gateway. Right, let's get started. Let's create a Razor component named checkout.razor within the Pages folder. let's create a C# class named checkoutbase.cs within the Pages folder. Let's write code to ensure that the checkout razor component inherits from the checkout base class. As the name of our razor component suggests, a user will navigate to this razor component in order to purchase the items within the user's shopping cart. PayPal makes it easy for us to integrate the payment gateway functionality within our applications by providing us with sample HTML and JavaScript code. In order to copy the relevant HTML and JavaScript code, let's navigate to this PayPal web page. If we scroll further down the page, PayPal presents us with a few options. I'm going to use the first option here. Let's click the Start Setup button. Let's select the variable price list item here. Let's select the desktop option here. Then to copy the relevant JavaScript and HTML code, we can click the Copy Code button here. Let's navigate to our index.html page and paste the HTML and JavaScript code currently stored within our clipboards here. You can see here we have a JavaScript function named init PayPal button. This method contains callback methods like, for example, createOrder and onApproved. The createOrder method is called by PayPal when an order is created, and the onApproved method is called after the relevant order has been approved by PayPal. Note that within the onApproved method, there is code that logs information about the order which is sent back from PayPal after an order has been approved to the browser console window. The relevant information is sent back from PayPal regarding the relevant order after the order has been approved by PayPal. So this gives us an idea of how our code integrates with PayPal. We also have a script tag here that references a script file at a specific PayPal location. The way in which we are able to link a PayPal account to our application is through this client-id parameter here. At the moment, we only have a placeholder value for the client-id parameter. I'll demonstrate a bit later how we are able to generate a valid client ID value that we can paste over this placeholder value here. I'll demonstrate this a bit later. We have this HTML code here that contains various fields and a placeholder for the relevant payment gateway related buttons that the user can use to start the payment process. The user will be able to pay using a valid debit or credit card by clicking this button, or if the user has a valid PayPal account, the user can use the user's PayPal account by clicking this button. For a particular integration requirement, we can tailor the sample code to our needs. So we are going to simplify the code here and remove code that is superfluous in relation to our particular requirement. So let's say that for a particular integration requirement, we only need the description field and the amount field. So we can delete the JavaScript code from the init PayPal button method here that references the HTML elements denoting the fields that we don't need. We don't need this code here, so let's delete it. We don't need this code because it is code used for validating user input. Code within our application will control what is entered into the appropriate fields, namely the amount field and the description field. Therefore, we don't need any user validation related code. In the onInit method, there is a lot of code relevant to user validation that we don't need. Let's delete the onInit method. Within the onClick method, we only need this code here that references the values that will be inserted into the amount and description fields at an appropriate time by certain code within our application. So let's copy the relevant code from the onClick method here. Let's paste it into the createOrder method here. Then we can simply delete the onClick method. You can see here in the onApproved method, we have code here that logs order information to the user's browser console window. This information is sent back from PayPal once a user's order has been approved by PayPal and contains details about the user's order. We'll examine the order information later when we test our code. You can see here that the sample code that we copied from PayPal includes a call to the init PayPal button JavaScript method. We want to control when the init PayPal button method is invoked. We'll implement the code to call the init PayPal button method using C# code and Blazor's JavaScript interoperability feature from within the Checkout Razor component in a bit. So let's remove the call to the init PayPal button from the index.html file. Let's cut this HTML code here and paste it into our checkout.razor file. This will allow the PayPal buttons to be available to the user when the user invokes the Checkout Razor component. For our particular requirement, let's say that all we are interested in is the description field and the amount field. So let's remove the HTML elements that we don't need for the implementation of our integration code with PayPal. We don't need the HTML elements that label the relevant fields, because we are going to make the amount field and description field hidden text fields. We don't want the user to enter any payment information. We are going to control the values that are inserted into these fields through C# code that we'll implement in a bit. We need this div element here because this tells PayPal, as it were, where we want the relevant PayPal gateway-related buttons placed within our UI. So, for our requirement, we don't want these fields to be visible to the user. So let's make these fields hidden text fields. So let's create the code for the checkout-base.cs class. We are going to want to call the init PayPal button JavaScript method that resides within our index.html file from within the checkout-base.cs class. So we need to write code that ensures that an object of type IJS runtime is injected into our Checkout Razor component at runtime. This is so that we can utilize Blazor's JavaScript interoperability feature to call the init PayPal button JavaScript method that we copied from the relevant PayPal web page earlier. We'll write the code to call this JavaScript method in a bit. We need to reference the collection of shopping cart items, so let's create a property of type IEnumerable that is strongly typed with the cart item DTO type. Let's create a property named TotalQTY. Let's create a property named Payment Description. Let's create a property named Payment Amount. Let's create code to bind the PayPal-related hidden text fields we have implemented within the checkout.razor file to their counterpart properties by using Blazor's @bind syntax. So this means that every time relevant property values change, Blazor will automatically update their counterpart input fields, i.e. the input fields that contain the relevant @bind syntax in the checkout.razor file. The payment description and payment amount properties will be bound to the input fields implemented within the checkout.razor file. So this is one of the aspects involved in integrating our application with PayPal. We can communicate the total payment amount to PayPal through the payment amount property, and we can communicate whatever payment description we want by updating the payment description property. The JavaScript within the init PayPal button method references the fields that we have implemented using hidden text fields in the checkout.razor file, i.e. the amount field and the description field. The fields are bound to their counterpart properties within the checkout base class. We can use this description field to uniquely identify a particular payment. There are, of course, many different ways to implement this type of functionality. I've chosen this way for the sake of the example, in the interests of keeping the example simple, i.e. for teaching purposes. When we run the code and create a test order, once our order is approved by PayPal, we'll be able to inspect the data within our browser's console window, which is the data sent back from PayPal after our order has been approved. We'll see that one of the fields contains our unique description value. We want an object of type iShoppingCartService to be injected into our checkout.razor component at runtime. So let's create a property of type iShoppingCartService and ensure that it is decorated with the inject attribute. Let's override the onInitialized async method. Let's implement code to retrieve the user's shopping cart items. We'll look at code in a later tutorial whereby we can use local storage functionality so that we don't have to make so many calls to the server. We can use local storage to improve performance, but we'll write this code in a later tutorial. So I'm writing code to create a new GUID here so that we can use this GUID value to uniquely identify a particular order. Let's assign the total payment amount to the payment amount property. Let's assign the total quantity to the total QTY property. Let's create an identifier field so that we can uniquely identify a particular order. As I said earlier, I'm just doing this for the sake of this example. It is up to the developer to modify the appropriate code so that it is adapted appropriately in relation to the developer's particular requirement. So let's include an O for order, followed by the user's ID, and then followed by the unique GUID value within the payment description field. Let's override the onAfterRenderAsync method. This method is called in response to the occurrence of a Blazor Lifecycle event that occurs after the relevant Razor component is rendered. We can use the first render argument passed to this method to ensure that our code within this method is only fired once after our Razor component is first rendered. So, if first render is true, we want code to execute that uses our JS object to call the init PayPal button JavaScript method. So you can see how we are integrating our checkout Razor component with the sample JavaScript code that we included within the index.html file. This is, of course, the sample code we copied from PayPal, so as to perform our integration with their payment gateway. So the next step is to generate the client ID whereby we can link our PayPal account to our application. So we need to do this through PayPal. Note that you are able to follow along with the next part of this tutorial, even if you just have a personal account with PayPal. You will, however, need a business account with PayPal if you wish to go live with the PayPal Payment Gateway functionality. PayPal provides a sandbox feature that we can use for development and testing purposes. But as I said, if you wish to go live, you'll need a PayPal business account. For instructions on how to create a PayPal business account, please navigate to this URL. So assuming you have a PayPal account, as stated, you are still able to follow along even if you just have a personal account and you don't have a business account. Let's log in to PayPal. Then let's click the developer menu option here so that we can use the sandbox feature to implement the server-side part of the integration functionality so that we can integrate the PayPal payment gateway into our application. You can then navigate to the dashboard like this. You can see here you have two options, one for sandbox and the other for live. We are going to use the sandbox facility. If you want to go live with your PayPal payment gateway, you would use the live facility. As discussed, you will need a PayPal business account before you are able to go live with the PayPal payment gateway. So to create the server-side functionality that we need in order to integrate the PayPal payment gateway into our application, click the Create App button. Let's give the app a sensible name and then create the app like this. We now have this client ID generated for us, and this is the key to how we can associate our client-side integration with our PayPal account. So let's copy this client ID value to our clipboards. Let's remain logged into PayPal, and let's appropriately paste the relevant client ID value to our index.html file here for the client-ID parameter. Great. While we are here, let's remove the enable-funding parameter here. Let's go back to PayPal. So for testing purposes, PayPal allows us to generate mock credit card details. When we test our code, we are going to use the generated mock credit card details to make a test payment. We can generate mock credit card details by clicking the Credit Card Generator menu option here. And then I'm going to select the United Kingdom as my country first. And then to generate the mock credit card details, we can press the Generate Credit Card button here. So let's copy the relevant mock credit card details and save them somewhere, so that we can access them a little bit later when we test our application. Before we test the code, let's make sure that we can navigate from our shopping cart Razor component to our checkout component. So to do this, let's appropriately update the code within our shopping cart.razor file. Then we must also ensure that we have an appropriate @page directive at the top of our checkout.razor file. A user needs to be able to navigate directly to the checkout Razor component, so we must include appropriate root template information following the @page directive. And now we should be able to make a test payment through our application. Let's run the code. Let's add some items to our shopping cart. Let's proceed to checkout. Let's appropriately enter our mock credit card details, along with some appropriate made-up data regarding personal information, like address and phone number. Excellent. Now, if we press F12 within our Chrome browsers, we can see the data sent back from PayPal. In the onApproved callback method defined within the init PayPal button method, we have code to log data sent back from PayPal after an approved order has been made. We could implement code that extracts the relevant data from the returned data from PayPal and update our application's database in an appropriate way, depending on our requirement. That functionality is beyond the scope of this course, but hopefully this gives you a good enough insight of how to integrate the PayPal functionality into your application. But please read the relevant developer-related information provided by your preferred payment gateway service provider for information on how to create relevant integration functionality that best suits your requirement. And you can see here our custom description value that we created earlier in code has been sent back from PayPal along with the other order information, which contains the user ID value and a GUID value that our code generates for each order that is sent to PayPal. So let's finish the code for our checkout razor component. Let's say that we want to display a summary of items that the user is purchasing on the checkout UI, next to the PayPal buttons. So let's write the code for this. Please note this code can be copied from the relevant GitHub repository. I've included the location of the relevant GitHub repository below in the description. Let's test the code. Excellent. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I look forward to presenting the next video in this series, where we'll continue to develop our shopping cart application. For content like this and much more, please consider subscribing, and please ring the bell so as to be notified of future content. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, and please feel free to share this video with anyone you feel may benefit from its content. If you'd like to thank me by buying me a coffee, I've included a link to my Buy Me a Coffee webpage. I've also included a PayPal Me link that you can use to support the channel via PayPal. Any support is greatly appreciated. A special thank you to those who have been kind enough to support the channel. It is greatly appreciated. I really enjoy engaging with you in the comments section, so please feel free to leave a comment. The latest code can be found on GitHub. A link to the relevant repository has been included below in the description. Thank you and take care.